Harley-Davidson is in deep trouble. The company is quietly pulling several models from its lineup, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the curtain, Harley is facing a storm of falling sales, frustrated investors, shifting customer tastes, and an aging customer base that's no longer enough to keep the wheels turning. It's not just about a few bikes getting the axe, it's about a company struggling to stay relevant in a world that's rapidly passing it by. So what's going wrong inside the House of Harley, and why are so many of their most well-known models disappearing without fanfare? But before we get into the details, if you're a fan of Harley or just want accurate information on the recent trends in the motorcycle industry, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps me keep putting out important information like this to keep you informed on what's going on in the industry. Declining sales and financial struggles. In 2024, Harley-Davidson experienced a significant downturn in its financial performance. I'm not talking about a slight dip in profits or a rough seasonal slump. Harley's 2024 numbers paint the picture of a brand in trouble. Global motorcycle shipments dropped a painful 17%, down to 148,862 units. And that decline wasn't isolated to international markets either. North American retail sales, which have always been Harley's stronghold, fell by 13%. For a brand built on domestic loyalty, that's a red flag flapping in the wind. Revenue is down 11% to $5.19 billion. Fourth quarter results are showing a brutal $214 million operating loss. And to top it off, the company didn't even issue a full year financial forecast for 2025. Why? Global tariff uncertainty. Translation? Even Harley-Davidson doesn't know how rough the road ahead might get. Now, this isn't the first time Harley's hit a rough patch. The brand has weathered recessions, fuel crises, and shifts in motorcycle culture before, but this time feels different. There's a deeper disconnect happening, one that can't just be fixed with a new paint scheme or a limited edition badge. Because underneath the financial woes is a much bigger problem. Harley-Davidson isn't building motorcycles that enough people want to buy anymore. A big part of Harley's identity is tied to the big cruiser lifestyle, touring bikes, V-twins, chrome everything, but that's exactly what's losing traction. Today's riders, especially younger ones, aren't dreaming of 900-pound motorcycles with $30,000 price tags. They want bikes that are lighter, faster, smarter, and more affordable. They're looking for connectivity, versatility, and in many cases, a bike that can handle both city streets and weekend adventure rides without costing an arm and a leg. Meanwhile, Harley has largely stayed in its lane, doubling down on heritage and tradition while slowly dipping its toes into modernization. The problem? It's not happening fast enough. The electric Livewire, for instance, was a bold step into the future, but its steep price and limited range put it out of reach for most potential buyers. Even their newer revamped models, like the Nightster or Pan America, have received mixed reactions, mostly from longtime Harley fans who either feel alienated or underwhelmed. Then there's the demographic issue. The core Harley buyer is getting older. Baby boomers made the brand what it is, but that generation is aging out of motorcycling altogether. Millennials and Gen Z haven't picked up the torch, at least not in large enough numbers to offset the losses. That generational handoff hasn't happened the way Harley needed it to, and now the company is left in a bind. Stay loyal to the aging base or reinvent itself for a new audience that isn't showing much interest. Internally, Harley has tried to steady the ship. CEO Jochen Zeitz implemented the Hardwire strategy, which focused on profitability over volume. On paper, it made sense. Trim the fat, focus on premium offerings, and avoid flooding the market. But the downside is that when you ship fewer bikes and those bikes aren't hitting the mark, the bottom line crumbles fast. That's exactly what 2024 looked like. So now Harley is at a crossroads. The numbers don't lie. What they're doing isn't working. And as we'll see soon, the company is quietly making some big moves behind the scenes, including cutting entire models from its lineup in an attempt to reset, refocus, and maybe, just maybe, reconnect with the riders they've been losing. Aging demographics and shifting consumer preferences. If we're to be honest, Harley-Davidson is having a bit of an identity crisis. It's like that cool uncle who was the life of the party in the 90s, still rocking leather jackets and talking about his glory days. Meanwhile, the world's moved on to electric scooters and TikTok. While the rest of the motorcycle industry is evolving, Harley's still polishing chrome and revving up nostalgia, and it's starting to show. The core issue? Harley's designing bikes for an audience that's slowly fading away. The big cruisers, baggers, and heavyweight touring bikes still hold a special place in many riders' hearts. But for younger generations, they just aren't the dream machines they used to be. They're heavy, expensive, and not exactly beginner-friendly. Just imagine being a 25-year-old looking for your first bike. You walk into a Harley dealership, see a $28,000 Ultra Limited, and suddenly that used Yamaha MT-07 looks like the deal of the century. What younger riders are asking for is pretty simple. Bikes that are lighter, more affordable, easier to ride, and loaded with tech. Think Bluetooth, ride modes, maybe some adventure-ready versatility. What they're getting from Harley, though, are machines built for long highway hauls, not city commutes or backroad twists. And while Harley has made efforts like the Nightster and the Pan America, it feels more like dipping a toe into the pool than jumping in. Let's talk price, too. Harley's lineup leans heavily into the premium segment. That works when your brand is hot and demand is high, but when people are tightening their belts and the market is flooded with high-performance bikes for half the price, suddenly premium starts to feel like overpriced. Add in the fact that insurance for your Harley can cost more than your monthly car payment, and the barrier to entry becomes a brick wall. Then there's the style factor. Harley's design language, big tanks, low seats, long wheelbases, hasn't really changed much in decades. That timeless look, it's starting to look dated. Compare a Harley to something like a Ducati Monster, a KTM Duke, or even a Triumph Speed Twin, and it's clear. Those brands are catering to the modern rider. Harley, on the other hand, is still talking about American steel, while Gen Z is over here asking if it comes with a USB-C port. It's not all doom and gloom, though. Harley knows it has to change. That's part of why they're quietly scaling back certain models and trying to streamline the brand. But the elephant in the room is this. They've spent so long building bikes for who they used to be, they've lost touch with who their next customer might want to be. So while Harley keeps celebrating the past, the future is busy lapping them. And unless they figure out how to build bikes that speak to a new generation, they risk becoming a brand that only lives in history books and biker bar stories. Funny how a company that made its name going fast is now struggling to keep up. Discontinuation of models. In response to the slow demand, Harley is quietly pulling a few models from its lineup. Unlike what we're used to seeing, they didn't hold a press conference. They didn't roll out a flashy announcement. Instead, Harley-Davidson just quietly started scrubbing certain models from their website, like they were trying to cover up old high school yearbook photos. And if you blinked, you might have missed it. Let's start with the Street series. Remember those? The Street 500 and Street 750 were supposed to be Harley's gateway bikes. Lightweight, urban-focused, and affordable, by Harley standards of course, they were meant to attract younger city-dwelling riders and serve as a stepping stone into the brand. But instead of creating a buzz, they barely made a ripple. Sales were lukewarm, reviews were mixed, and even Harley's own fanbase didn't really know what to make of them. Eventually, the company pulled the plug and moved on like it never happened. But 2024's cuts go deeper. The Iron 883, a longtime staple of the Sportster family, has disappeared from the US lineup. For many new riders, the Iron 883 was the entry point into Harley ownership. Lean, mean, and still unmistakably Harley. So why cut it? Because even a fan favorite can't escape emissions regulations, changing market demand, and a shift in focus toward higher margin models. Harley isn't just trimming the fat, they're completely reshaping the body. The 48? Gone. The Road King? Gone. The Ultra Limited and Road Glide Limited? Also, nowhere to be found in the 2025 lineup. These are names that used to be iconic, bikes you'd see proudly parked outside diners, roadhouses, and weekend bike nights, but now Harley's letting them go, partly because of low sales, partly because of tightening emissions rules, and partly because they're making room for new platforms like the Revolution Max engine lineup. Harley's move here is surgical. They're trying to streamline operations, focus on newer models, and pour resources into bikes they think will actually move the needle. Models like the Nightster, Sportster S, and Pan America are front and center now, leaning into performance, modern tech, and cleaner engines. The problem is, these newer bikes don't yet have the same emotional pull or cult following that older Harleys enjoyed. They're trying to be something new, but the audience is still figuring out whether it's something they want. From a business standpoint, cutting underperforming models makes sense. Fewer SKUs means less overhead, simplified production, and a tighter brand message. But emotionally, it stings. When Harley pulls something like the Iron 883 or Road King, it's not just losing a bike, it's losing part of its soul. For longtime fans, these bikes aren't just products, they're memories on wheels. Still, Harley is betting that these moves are necessary for long-term survival. They're downsizing to survive, not to disappear. And while the strategy might upset purists, it shows that the company is trying to evolve, just in its own painfully slow, Milwaukee kind of way. The big question now is, will the models replacing these classics be good enough to write a new chapter for the brand, or is Harley just rearranging deck chairs on a ship that's slowly sinking? Fight for survival. At this point, it's clear Harley-Davidson isn't just refreshing its lineup. This is triage, a full-blown survival play. Behind the bold branding and chrome polish, the company is navigating an existential crisis, and the decisions being made now could define whether Harley thrives in the coming decades or becomes a cautionary tale of a legacy brand that couldn't adapt. You see, Harley's core audiences, mostly older, wealthier riders who came up in the Easy Rider era, just isn't being replaced fast enough. Baby boomers were once the lifeblood of the brand, fueling massive growth through the 90s and early 2000s, but those riders are aging out, hanging up their helmets or switching to trikes. Meanwhile, millennials and Gen Z are looking at motorcycles differently. They're practical, tech-savvy, some are eco-conscious, and most of all, they want a bike that fits into their lives, not a lifestyle that demands $25,000 in a denim vest. Harley knows this. That's why, buried in their recent strategic planning documents and earnings calls, you'll hear a lot about premiumization, global markets, and streamlined offerings. Translated, Harley is leaning harder into high-margin products and scaling back on anything that isn't pulling its financial weight. They're also trying to offload production to overseas partners like Hero Motocorp in India and Xianjiang in China, quietly shifting manufacturing for some models in hopes of reaching new audiences without cannibalizing the brand's US image. They've also made a hard pivot toward electric. The idea is to carve out a new identity that speaks to a new kind of rider without diluting the heritage. It's clever, in theory, but sales have been slow, infrastructure is lacking, and most of Harley's core customers don't want to plug in, they want to fire up. And internally, there's been turbulence. Under Jochen Zeitz's leadership, Harley adopted the Hardwire strategy, focusing on long-term growth and repositioning the brand as a more focused, leaner operation. But this meant walking away from volume and chasing profit margins, even if it meant selling fewer bikes overall. It's a risky move, because while Harley wants to sell fewer bikes at higher prices, there's only so much room at the top. And if new riders can't afford the entry ticket, or worse, don't care enough to try, it's game over. To their credit, Harley has tried a few bold plays. The Pan America, for example, was a shock to the system. An American-built adventure bike that actually held its own against giants like BMW's GS series. Riders were impressed. It was modern, fast, and loaded with tech. The problem? It felt like an outlier rather than a signal of a brand-wide shift. Same with the Sportster S. New engine, new platform, but launched with lukewarm marketing and an identity crisis. So now, Harley is stuck in the middle of a very tricky balancing act. On one side, there's tradition, legacy, and a fan base that expects a certain sound, feel, and look. On the other hand, there's the future, one that demands innovation, accessibility, and relevance in a very different world. And Harley's trying to play both sides without fully committing to either. And the clock? Oh, it's ticking loud. Because while Harley reorganizes and reshapes, other brands are moving fast. Yamaha, Honda, Triumph, and even newer players like Zero are snapping up young riders with smart pricing, lightweight platforms, and bikes that feel built for 2025, not 1995. If Harley waits too long, they risk being remembered more for what they were than what they could have become. Survival is still possible. There's power in the name, there's history in every tank badge. But legacy alone won't carry Harley forward. The company needs a real plan, not just to cut costs and trim models, but to actually inspire a new generation of riders. Because if Harley-Davidson doesn't figure out how to connect with the future, it might just become a relic of the past. Internal conflicts and strategic uncertainty. As if the market headwinds weren't enough, Harley-Davidson is also dealing with something just as dangerous: turmoil from the inside. And when your ship is already taking on water, the last thing you want is a mutiny brewing below deck. At the center of the storm is activist investor H Partners, a group that owns a sizable chunk of Harley stock and isn't shy about using that leverage. In early 2024, they launched an aggressive campaign to shake things up, specifically to oust CEO Jochen Zeitz and several board members. Their argument? That Harley's leadership had fumbled the ball on strategy, failed to turn around slumping sales, and lacked a coherent vision for the future. In other words, this ship needs a new captain. Now, to be fair, Zeitz wasn't some random guy plucked from a golf course. He's the former Puma CEO who stepped in during a turbulent period and quickly became the architect of Harley's current Hardwire plan. A strategy focused on fewer models, premium positioning, and long-term profitability over short-term volume. He even took the unusual step of becoming both chairman and CEO, consolidating more power than most executives are ever allowed to have in a legacy company. But to H Partners, that was the problem. They believed Zeitz had too much control, too little oversight, and wasn't delivering the results Harley desperately needed. Their campaign made headlines, rattled shareholders, and forced Harley to defend its strategy publicly. In the end, the board backed Zeitz and beat back the rebellion, but the damage was done. The drama exposed real cracks in Harley's leadership structure and raised serious questions about where the company goes from here. And now, Zeitz has announced his retirement. He's staying on temporarily until a successor is named, but the message is clear: a changing of the guard is coming, and with it comes a tidal wave of uncertainty. because it's not just about who wears the CEO title, it's about whether the next leader will double down on the current path or pivot entirely. Will they stay the course with electric bikes and high-end touring models, or will they try to rebuild Harley's middle class, those affordable classic cruisers that used to keep the lights on? This leadership limbo is creating a strategic fog. Internally, employees and execs are stuck waiting for clarity. Externally, investors are jittery, unsure whether to hold, fold, or cash out altogether. And the customers? They're watching a brand they love try to find its footing while quietly hoping it doesn't lose what made it special in the first place. What's especially tricky is that Harley's identity has always been tied to a strong image, power, confidence, rebellion. But uncertainty doesn't sell rebellion, it sells hesitation. And right now, Harley's lack of clear leadership is starting to bleed into its public perception. Until a new CEO is named, and until that person sets a firm direction, Harley is effectively stuck in neutral, revving the engine, but unsure which road to take. Looking ahead, Harley-Davidson isn't dead, but it's definitely in a fight for its life. Right now, the company is staring down a road it never thought it would travel, one where the thunderous roar of nostalgia has to compete with the quiet hum of change. The brand that once defined freedom on two wheels is now navigating a landscape that's faster, smarter, and frankly a lot less patient. The next few years will be critical. To survive and thrive, Harley has to stop building bikes for the rider they wish still existed, and start building for the rider that actually does. That means getting real about affordability. Younger riders aren't ignoring Harley because they hate motorcycles, they're ignoring Harley because the entry point often costs as much as a used car. The $3,000 to $7,000 price range is where today's future loyalists live, and right now, Harley barely shows up in that space. But price is only part of the puzzle. This new generation also expects modern tech, smart design, and versatility. They want Bluetooth connectivity, ride modes, lightweight frames, better fuel efficiency, or in some cases, no fuel at all. Harley has made baby steps in this direction, but the truth is, those models feel more like experiments than movements. If Harley wants to really make waves, it has to stop treating innovation like a side project and start treating it like the main event. At the same time, Harley can't just ditch its heritage. That bar and shield logo still means something. There's history in that tank design, legacy in every V-twin rumble, and an emotional connection most brands would kill to have. The trick will be blending that legacy with progress, keeping the soul of Harley alive while updating the body and brain. Think modern power plants with retro style, app integration with analog charm, badass design without the back-breaking ergonomics. And maybe, just maybe, Harley has to learn how to laugh at itself a little. The brand got so wrapped up in being the legend that it forgot to loosen the bandana once in a while. Today's riders connect with brands that are authentic and self-aware, not ones that act like they're stuck in a 1998 Levi's commercial. Embracing that shift in tone, in attitude, might just be as important as tweaking engines and price tags. With the right leadership, a sharper strategy, and a little less ego, Harley-Davidson has the bones to pull off one of the greatest comebacks in modern automotive history, but the window's closing fast. The next chapter is being written right now, and whether it's a redemption story or an elegy will depend entirely on the choices Harley makes starting today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next video.